get the position, the last of the batter-ups, right? We had all these great speakers. The good news is I didn't listen to all of it, and I think maybe I can pull some threads together for you about some of these different ideas, from the role of foster parents to the addiction issues, to some of the challenges that Judge Weaver brought up about some of your work. It won't be a magic wand, but might have a few things to pull together as you go into your afternoon session after I talk about what's next steps for you in the local counties. Just a few seconds on me. I've been my entire career, except for a little short period when Washington State had a similar budget crisis. Some of you all old enough to remember there was a recession in the 80s. We were working, we had cutbacks then. And I got put into doing nursing home placements for a short time. And I ran down the hall and begged them to get me back in child welfare. And the people in adult services couldn't understand why someone would beg me back in child welfare. But it's been my passion. I've worked in group homes as a residential worker, then worked with the state of Washington for many years as a line worker, intake, ongoing, licensing. I love to change jobs, whatever, so I did a lot of different jobs. Then I became a supervisor. Then I ran what became the first child welfare academy training in the country after a very tragic child death case in our state in the 80s. We were required legally to develop that. At that point, there was no standardized training anywhere in the country. And we have, oh, you having trouble hearing? Thank you. Usually people tell me I have too big of a mouth, but we'll go with, how's that? Is it on? Let's see, the right way, there, power. How's that? Okay. And I was after many years in the Washington State system, Seattle, so I'm like Linda, I actually hail from Seattle. I got my graduate degree at UW. But I'll put a little side note, way back when, I can also call myself a Cornhusker because I lived in Seward for a number of years growing up. My dad worked at Concordia. So I didn't take sides for that one, so I'm okay with that. Then I work for Casey. Now I've been doing national consulting. A lot of the national work I do is the National Resource Center on Permanency and Family Connections. It's about the third name that Hunter College programs had as our practice evolves. So we're going to be talking about some of that stuff, about connections and permanency and how they're connected through parenting time. And somewhere in all of that, I had 2 kids who I now can say officially my youngest just graduated from college. So I don't think I have any more college tuition payments due after all these years, right? That's a big step for any of you to get that role as a parent. So that's a little bit about me. Mainly what I always take away from all of this is the thing that I constantly learn from, even though I'm not doing direct practice anymore, is, as your initiative says, look at the system through the eyes of the child. Look at your case plans, your court orders through the eyes of the child, not through, is it going to make it easier or not for me? And I tell you right now, at the end of my presentation, some of you may be upset with me because I'm going to make your job more difficult. I'm going to give you some tools, but I'm maybe going to give you more requirements than you currently think you have around this thing called parenting time. So, first of all, some ground rules about visits. Visits must always be safe for the child. Parenting time, connection works, whatever you want to call it. I like the parenting time talk, but I'm going to talk a little bit about visits and connections because we want to also talk about siblings and other people the child needs to have connections with. They must always, always be safe. They cannot re-abuse or re-traumatize the child. And on the other hand, we're going to talk about, and if the child really needs to see that parent, which most kids do, it is our job to find a way that they can do it safely. You cannot just rely on no visits because mom and dad are bad people. They haven't gone to their treatment programs yet. He's that sexually offending dad. We're going to talk about some real challenges. But if that child really needs to see them, it is our job to find the way to have it the safest contact possible. So we're also going to talk about visits and contacts maybe much more than you're thinking about. It's not always just about face-to-face time. It might be in a therapeutic setting. It might be a letter that's even screened, a phone call, email, Skypes, whatever is going on. We're going to talk about different ways you can have the connections. It is very seldom that the only answer to a child's request to see their parent is, I'm sorry, there's absolutely no way you can do that without being traumatized. But that is the bottom line. If the visitor contact is traumatizing or experiencing other things that are related to re-abuse or trauma. Oh, and then I'm going to come another thing, ground point. Some of you, I know, have dual jobs in your counties. Much of what I'm going to talk about today is also very solidly based in divorce visits. So a lot of the same concepts can be applied. I thought this was child welfare visits were difficult to do. And then a judge in Oklahoma asked me a couple years ago, he said, could you just add on a little bit? Because we have a lot of judges and guardian ad litems and attorneys who have both types of cases. So I went to several classes and reading up on it, and I went, oh my goodness. I thought child welfare cases, some of you judges probably know what I'm talking about, how nasty people get in court about fighting over what is in the best interest of the child. The judge this morning gave some examples. I just want to say a lot of this does apply and it has strong relationships that both from the research from both areas, divorce and foster care visits. So children will feel discomfort, especially early on. Foster parents are going to feel discomfort about these kids being taken and going out and seeing these abusive parents. Birth parents are going to feel really weird that somebody's watching them and assessing them. And let's be honest, many of us have a lot of discomfort about visits, particularly if you've been involved in visits that have gone bad. Or later on, either you were in the visit and saw it go bad or you get the report later on. All you have to do is one time and do some things wrong. I've learned a lot of my practices when I did it wrong, where I'm worried about the time. I'm a new little social worker, and I'm literally like pulling little baby's fingers off mommy so that I can get the kid out of the visit room so the next person can get in there. And this kid is going hysterical, and the parent's going hysterical. And of course, though I'm trying to pretend I'm not, I was going hysterical, right? When you do it wrong, kids can be harmed by visits. So as much as I'm an absolute advocate for it, there are ways we do it wrong. So we're going to talk about how to make sure that doesn't happen. So what is the purpose of visits? The primary purpose is to meet the child's developmental, attachment, emotional needs. What happens to babies who don't attach to anyone? Right, failure to thrive, right? You literally will die if you just have your body needs met and not your emotional needs met. This is how important it is to children. So we want to really think about that throughout all of that. Most cases progress beyond that, and the child's developmental needs are also met, when they're met, we can do the second purpose, that is to assess the parent's skills or capabilities, then teach, mentor, have them practice what they're learning in their therapies or whatever on the visits, and then eventually we get to, and then evaluate whether they can do it good enough to get the kid back. The permanency decision. So, as I said, there is a PowerPoint in the handouts if you haven't found those. That's left there. All right, so how do we decide this big thing called final permanency? Reunification, adoption, guardianship, with termination of parental rights, sometimes some other things like planned permanent living arrangements. How do we make that decision? We're on that 15th month of the 22 months in care, or sometime before then, right? But we're at that permanency planning decision point. You've given valid exceptions. Sooner or later we want to get this, and of course in child welfare we keep on saying sooner rather than later, right? Treatment is absolutely needed in the vast 99% of your cases. So all the stuff that Linda was saying earlier, like drug treatment, how important all of those are, and to have it timely and everything. But the big piece we forget a lot of times is treatment is not enough, right? How many of you have already heard something today? I'm not going to ask people to raise hands, but think, heard something today and you go like, well, that's great, Rose, that's great, Linda, that's great, Judge Weimer, but in my situation, I ain't going to do it when I get back to my office. I do it differently. I don't have enough resources. I don't believe in that, right? That happens all the time to everybody, particularly adults. Anything you get new, it's like you have to kind of redo your computer brain, go like, boy, does that fit into my view of the world? If it doesn't, do I have a reason to change it? Here's the point I'm trying to make. If a parent goes to treatment, gets a perfect report, you even get that treatment person in your courtroom doing testifying rather than sending the paper in saying what they did. Do all of those things right, but the family hasn't done this, you are taking a major risk to send the child home. Visits are the place we test out. First we teach, but then we test out. Did they really get it? So I'm going to say it out loud even though I know you know what this says, but just to kind of, there needs to be successful visits. We'll talk a bit later about how to do progressive successful visits so that you get our number one point, that is safe visits, non-traumatizing visits. So successful visits, more than once. I don't know what the magic number is. I don't have research on this, but more than once is my opinion. It has to be at least overnight, maybe. So eventually, you usually start with like 1 hour visits, maybe in your office or a visit center, highly supervised. Then we're going to talk a little bit later and talk about how you progressively move safely to the overnight visits. In the home, the parent will be raising the child. And if that's some crappy trailer home, that's where we're going to do it. If that's some homeless shelter, that's where we're going to do it. Because that's the physical environment does impact, right? Their ability. To just do it in the office doesn't mean they can do it out in their environment. Particularly if you have legitimate concerns or that was part of the maltreatment with the physical environment. And here's another clinker that a lot of folks don't think about. With all the people who will parent that child. So if mommy's got that new boyfriend, and mommy's got a bad history of picking bad boyfriends, and he's not legal dad, he hasn't even been kind of custodial dad, you don't have a lot of legal rights to bring him into the courtroom. In fact, we often, the research is really clear, even with legal dads, we're not getting them into the courtroom and in case plans very well. We want to just push that guy aside. We don't like him. Right? Anytime your gut's going like that, when I'm giving you the challenge to say, but if mom is going to have a relationship with him, once the child goes home and we close the dependency, then we got to test out how he impacts the family system. Because usually our stomachs in a knot over those cases, because we do have some history with mom. This can also happen with dads, but mostly we see with our moms, who've had a bad history of stuff. For example, one of the many other roles I've had in this child welfare system is I've been a CASA, and that was my last CASA case. Mom was a non-offending parent. She had so much time, she'd done all of our treatment stuff twice, 3 times. She probably could have taught some of these classes. Dad was the offending dad. He'd sexually offended other kids, but not these kids. He was the father of the last 2 kids. He was drug addicted. He was a domestic violence batterer. He was in state prison for violating his parole on a sex abuse conviction. But he was coming out within weeks of the termination. In Washington State, you have a full Superior Court termination trial. I'm not sure how it happens here in Nebraska. That's not standard how they do the termination decisions. And the judge, it was his first time he'd ever done a termination one. And you could just see how much he was struggling with trying to make this horrifically difficult decision. And we almost lost it for 2 points. One, we hadn't done any reasonable efforts with Dad because we said, hey, he's a bad guy, he's out in prison, we don't have to deal with him. Hope you all know that's not true. Now, I mean, this is only a few years ago. And 2, Mom's gone to all of her treatments. But we know she wasn't better. We never told her what she had to do, demonstrate the changed behavior, the parental capacities, whatever words you want to call it, minimum sufficient level of care. We've used different terms in child welfare to try to get to this. What's the changed behavior that mom and daddy have to do? And for mom, it was really clear when we got her on visits. You put her in a room this big, which we did, we never got to unsupervised visits, and you put the 4 kids in the room, she had no ability to track them and stay focused on it. She spent the whole time trying to talk to you, whoever was supervising the visits. And the big clinker for her was, even though she said all the right things on stand, I asked, at the CASA, I asked my attorney to make 1 phone call to the state prison and say, ask, his father was sitting there in the court with his attorney and said, he wouldn't tell us, of course. I said, ask his prison probation officer what is his release address. And guess whose release address he had? Mom's. So you got to, and that was even with legal dad. You've got to think about that. And we're going to also talk about the last point here this morning, or this afternoon is, and how do you slowly, progressively move visits so when we, at the beginning, we're doing everything possible to make the visit happy, safe, stay away from anything that might bad happen. And for our successful parents, we are going to deliberately move the visits that's going to test them out. What's the most stressful time in a day for a family? I saw a lot of you raise your hands if you've had kids. What is some of the most stressful, normal family times in a 24-hour period? Bedtime. What are some other ones? Getting ready for school. What's some other ones? Supper time, right after school. Do those sound like the times you guys tend to have your visits? I bet you're like most agencies, we tend to have our visits between 8 and 5, Monday through Friday. Some of you are shaking your head. Bet you don't? Great. So we're going to figure out how we're going to do visits that may not fit into your normal schedules or locations so that we really are testing it out. And we'll talk at the end of this session. And for our addicted parents, we're going to push them all the way through where we're going to have visits. This on our successful families, so some families will never get here. But our kids who do go home, we're going to test out through visit planning whether they'll, when they're in their time, place, persons, locations, stresses that would trigger their relapse, that their relapse plan works. That their relapse plan works. It's not just a plan on paper, we want to see it actually work. So I'm just crazy enough that, as Linda said, almost everybody who goes to recovery has some relapses. It is part of the journey to recovery, not a failure. I'm almost crazy enough, I want to see them go through a relapse. I'm not going to make them, but in the time that they're under our jurisdiction, so that we know we have some better evidence that that relapse plan will really work once we terminate our jurisdiction on the case. This is the Nebraska guidelines. How many of you have read the new, I think it's relatively new, Nebraska guidelines on parenting time? Okay. I think it was supposed to be in the packet, but I didn't see it there. So if not, maybe one of the staff people from the initiative can tell you where to get it. You really want to look at it for all of you in all your positions, because it does, for example, most states don't do this, but you've gone as far as to name the minimum amount of contact that people should have. So when the judge was talking about earlier today, it shouldn't just be, what's the old term you use, reasonable, fair and reasonable. This is going to give you some more specifics about what is, what's good for the child. What's good for the child. All right? And it gives you some other stuff that we're going to talk about in the course of the PowerPoint slides that are there. So this is from a national perspective. Myself and a number of people kind of been slowly putting this together as really, people said, give us some guidelines. What is best practice when it comes to visits? It should be a written plan. I can't tell you how often it's not, so you think that's 101. It should be part of the case plan and court orders. It's integrated to the whole practice. It's not this little thing, if you had time, go ahead and have a visit. I know most of you are more sophisticated than that, but I just want to make sure you do that. It must include all the parties. Often we're not talking to the kids. What do the kids want or don't want on visits? Right? Particularly if they're not showing up in court hearings or other family meetings that you might be having. Another big role that we often forget is the foster parent or relative caregiver. Because if they ain't happy about the plan, it's probably not going to work. You know, if that's, you're having the plan around the time that they have dinner, or here's a big one, we'll talk a little bit more later. If the kid goes to the visit and the parent fills them up with food that the foster parent doesn't like, or they think it's too sweet, or it's this or too that or that, not healthy enough, and then the kid comes back and doesn't want to have a dinner at the foster home tonight, we all start fighting over the dinner. Anyone have that fight between? We're going to talk about those issues, right? So we want to really include all of them because we're going to be doing shared parenting, as we heard the first thing this morning. Shared parenting process, rather than we could divide this kid up. And the same thing getting out. You see this in divorces all the time. It's so easy to see it in somebody else, hard to see what happens to yourself. But we're lucky that I haven't experienced divorce myself personally, but seeing many of my family and friends who are reasonable people who totally lose their reason when they're going through divorce. And you stand back and as an observer and you go like, how in the world could you even think that doing that is in the best interest of your child? Having these fights over things like food and school and religion to the point that the child is just totally traumatized by what's happening with their family. Or even worse, told basically, if you love this mommy, then you better not come home because I'm your mommy or your daddy. Right? The children are told to have divided loyalties. Visits should mimic normal parenting.
As I said earlier, if getting them up for school, getting them dressed, teaching chores, taking them to the doctor, going to school appointments. Only the things that really have to be supervised by us, which are usually indicated by what is the agreed upon or the adjudicated maltreatment, or the things that we need to get involved with. A lot of these things that we call visits, when you're feeling overloaded, you need to step back and say, is that really something we have to be fully supervising? So we'll talk a little bit about levels of supervision. But for example, let's say they do agree on what religion. Not only do mommies and daddies in divorce disagree on religion, foster parents and birth families often don't even talk about what religion. In the name of confidentiality of the foster parents, we can't tell you who they are, where they are, and what religion they're involved with. But it's Sunday morning, and what our research shows is a huge percentage of our foster parents are very religious, and as part of their religious value system that leads them into foster care. And we don't think about where that child's going to be Sunday morning, where they're going to be. They're going to be in the pew of the church of the foster parent. And the foster parent's not deliberately trying to make them a Catholic or a Buddhist or whatever, but what they're trying to do is just live their normal life. But nobody sat down and talked to the birth parent about what religion. And if they're involved in religion, there's a very good chance that somebody in their church might be willing to go and pick that child up on Sunday morning and bring him over to their church instead. It doesn't have to necessarily be the state social worker who does it. And the parents might even be somewhere in that congregation, or even sitting in the same pew. And it might be very possible, even with some of your, for that 1 hour into that situation, that child and parent could be together and within their normal daily way that they would be raising kids. Don't make it so easy on these birth parents. Is another way to look at this. If I only have to be responsible for my kid 1 or 2 hours a day, a week, out of the whole week, it's easy to be a parent. Any of you grandparents yet? My kids haven't given me that pleasure yet. You get that kind of phenomenon, how you much more you enjoy grandparenting than being the bio 24/7 parent? Because you can spoil them. You can give them candy when mom said not to. You can let them stay up later than their bedtime. Because who deals with the consequences after you send them home to mom, to the kids, mom and dad, right? Is there 24/7 parents. And we do the same problem with foster care. And that's why a lot of our foster parents get really upset about visits. Because there it becomes this like, I'm the sugar daddy, or I am the divorced parent who I get to do all the fun things, and then the foster parent has to deal with all the real things. You flunked out in school this week. You were disrespectful to your foster parents. You hit your sister. You haven't done your chores. Right? All those normal things that we want to make it as much as possible the birth parents don't get exceptions to all that by laying all the problems on the foster parents, and the 1 or 2 times a week they get together, they get to be the fun parent. That's not real life. First placement within 24 hours, hopefully no longer than 72. This is a nice melding point, 48 hours. What else did you hear about should happen in the first 48 hours today? Icebreaker meetings. They often are happening at the same type of time. For you as workers, think about coordinating all this. Bringing people into your office or some community location. Part of the meeting is parenting time, and part of the time is let's do the icebreaker, which the child may not be involved with or whatever. But often these what other states are doing is happening about the same time and done exactly the same visit. And the last point is, and I don't know if this is an issue here at all in Nebraska, but the case-carrying worker, if you're so lucky that you have other people helping you with visits, case aides, other community providers, therapists, and you are the caseworker who has to write the court report, make the recommendation, and stand up in front of the judge and say, this is what I want, you can't just do it by third party, the legal term, right? You have to be in there at least once a month seeing what's going on. Unless, and this is for the judges in the room, unless you're willing to let the judge bring that other third party in and talk to them directly when it comes to the discussions that the judge needs to hear. So you shouldn't be, as judges, accepting only third party testimony about what's happening in visits. State social workers should either be seeing it and reporting on it. They can have other people helping them for a lot of them. And or that person who's doing it, let's say it's a therapist who's regularly doing it, then you need to be talking to the therapist about how are the visits going. Some other ones, least restrictive, you guys understand that? Most home-like, getting them out of your office. Research is really clear. Our county, state offices are like the least effective places to have visits. Nobody's comfortable. Quite frequently, most of them are like, when I went back to doing CASA to my office in Seattle, I could not believe what I saw. I swear there was toys I donated to that visit room that was still there 20 years later. Some ratty couches that probably the social workers donated again. In a room that was originally intended to be an office, had no outside windows, a little TV hung up on the top of the ceiling, and they called that their visit rooms. And even worse yet, we'll talk about supervision later on. And they had a little slit in the door. You know how those offices have little slits, windows? A security guard would walk by every few minutes and look through the slit, and they called that supervised visits. Right? Nothing about that leads to some of the other things we're talking about. So getting them out of your offices, into foster homes, into the birth parents' homes. A little reminder that if you haven't, on the 2008 Family Connections Act from the feds, siblings must first be placed together. As judges, you should be asking, this is separate from this issue, but I'll just make my plug. You should be asking and not accepting the answer, I'm sorry, we just don't have the right foster homes. First and foremost, siblings should be placed together. And when they can't, they must be provided visits. As social workers, if you're going to come in and say, I'm sorry, yes, Jane and John are in separate foster homes, but we just don't have the resources right now, that should not be an acceptable answer by the federal law. The only acceptable time is when there is an actual, like, therapeutic safety issue. Like John is sexually abusing Jane. He's picked up his parents' habits, and there is no way that you can find to make it safe. Something pretty traumatic. But the law is really clear about that. The standard is that they will be together unless you can prove a valid exception, why not? One child really assaulting another child. And or when they can't have that, when they do have visits, in visit plans you need to have a separate visit plan for all the siblings. And this is a real challenge because, for example, you might have a half-sibling who's with a different parent and there's a divorce decree and there's all this, right? Or an older sibling was adopted by somebody else and we no longer have any oversight with the adoption laws, divorce laws, and child welfare laws do not coordinate well. And I'm sure I'm not telling any of the judges or other people in the room something that you don't already know, right? They are sometimes an absolute contradiction to each other about what they're recommending. And the last one, visits are not punishment. Visits are never to be used to reward punishment. Often seen like this in court orders or recommendations to the court. When dad goes into drug treatment programs and passes 3 random UAs over the next 3 months, then he gets to start having visits. When mom has her battering husband move out of the house and will show up for visits without him, then she gets to start having visits, or gets to have more visits. And even sometimes to children we hear from foster parents and other people, well, if you don't behave really well this week, then I'm going to call your social worker and tell them you can't go on a visit. As if this was something that's optional in a child's life when they're in foster care. Good intentions. I know you have good intentions. The research doesn't back you up. The research doesn't back you up. In fact, in parents' visits, it seems to work the opposite. It's not conclusive evidence-based research, but if parents are visiting regularly, then they tend to go to treatment. But to say go to treatment and then you get to see your kids or more frequent contact with your kids. Hear the difference? The first one does seem to work, so something about that engagement stuff. I think that's what this is my social work point of view. When parents see their kids regularly, then they have some more hope they're going to get them back, and the less ability to kind of withdraw. It's not my problem, it's all them, and withdraw into my mental illness, my drug addiction, my denials. You're sitting in there, I know that this would be hard for me. I had a slight experience like this. My second son was born premature by 2 months and spent his first month in his life at the university hospital. I knew for a fact that those nurses and doctors, though they gave me standards, medical standards he had achieved before he could go home, his birth weight, his feeding schedule, whether his heart monitor went off. But the real other factor that they were looking at is how good of parents do they think my husband and I were? So I know what it feels like to be watched and know that the outcome of your parent-child relationship is dependent on somebody else who isn't giving you standards. And I just want to ever go back and say to all the birth parents I didn't do a good job with is, God paid me back a little bit during that month of my life. That nurse I was having a little power struggle with and trying to be Miss Nice and not confront her. When my son was big enough, at a couple weeks old, he was out of all his tubes and everything, and we were announced he's big enough to have a real bath. Now, my husband and I were down there. We lived a mile away from the hospital. We were down there every 4 hours for a month. Even in the middle of the night, we would get up. At least one of us would get up and go down, even when we couldn't hardly touch him and couldn't feed him yet. So she knew we'd be there. I walk in the door like promptly at 8 o'clock that next morning. She runs up to me and says, Rose, guess what I did? I gave Andrew his bath. 22 years later, I could kill the woman. I can get myself upset about it. I can feel my heart pounding right now about how angry I was that I finally had a chance to do something for my son rather than the nurses and doctors do something for him. Something I even knew from my social work background means I probably could be better bonded with my child, and she took it away. Now, 22 years later, I can tell you, I really have no memories of the 10,000 other baths I gave that boy. But I can tell you the one time they took it away from me. And so if you see parents get real upset on visits, I said, like, I learned really, I knew it cognitively, but that experience made me learn it here. So don't use visits as punishment and reward for trying to think that that's going to just get parents to be better. All right, here is your Nebraska standards. This is face-to-face time based on age. Why do babies need more time than adolescents? Not just because we don't like adolescents.
Bonding.
Bonding time. Remember, it's all about bonding. Optimal would actually be every day. Optimal would be something like I had at that hospital, where I had 24/7 access to my child, and I could drop in whenever I want. There are some programs trying some of those things. Or the old-fashioned idea for, again, some of us old enough, like with teenage unwed mothers, as we used to call them, and we put the mother and the baby in the same foster home. There's some co-parenting models that are being tried out in little pieces around the country about how can we not break connections every time we put a child in care. So look at that, and then you supplement it with other contacts. Phone, school, activities, medical, the things I was talking about. Email, Skyping. Here's the other thing I want to say about all those things, how wonderful they are. If you truly have a case where that child says, I really want to see daddy, and he is just the worst son of a gun daddy or mommy you've ever had in your courtroom or on your caseload, and you have absolute valid therapeutic reasons not to allow the contact, I just want you for a moment to say, what if? What if they're in the classroom and not Judge Weimer's 9-year-old daughter, but somebody else's 7-year-old child has a cell phone already? You think that child's not going to ask to borrow the cell phone? What if they know stuff about internet and Facebooking, and there's a computer at school or at the foster home or at their friend's home? You think they're not going to contact that parent? And that parent might not try to contact them? It only takes a few seconds when you're not listening in a visit for the child either already knows the phone number, Facebook address, whatever. So the point I'm making is, one, it's a wonderful way to supplement when we can't do face-to-face time. But on the other hand, if you think you're protecting that child in those truly, truly bad cases, we say no contact. And I believe there are cases like that. That's what we should be doing. Always assume, except for the smallest of infants, that it is possible in today's world for them to have contact that you don't know about. So our number one job is to help that child learn to be safe, and for the other people around them, foster parents, other birth parents, social workers, and as that child gets older, to develop their own internal mechanisms for safety. We cannot guarantee it. When I was a social worker and my adolescent sexually abused girls would run back to their daddies, I don't know about you, I don't think we have any law enforcement officers here, do we? But I can tell you in Seattle, they'd only go out about 3 times at the most to pick her up again and put her back in foster care. And then the officers wouldn't take my calls anymore. I've got a court order that says they can't have contact. But she's 16 years old and they're meeting in the park. Or should they literally running back to their homes, to the offending parent? Because they no longer see us as helping them. Because we've used visits as reward and punishments. We've used foster care. Foster care feels like being put in jail to a lot of our foster care kids. When we say no contact, sometimes not only with the offending parent, but the non-offending parent, because you won't get rid of that man in your life. Sometimes with siblings, we took them out of their high schools and put them in another high school in a different part of the county, and deliberately did that, all in the name of trying to protect this child. Which didn't make sense to us at the time, except again, the kids taught me, for the kids who really want to see them, they're going to see them. So I always want you to have that question in your head. If you have a true case that says no contact is safest, you cannot assume that if the child doesn't believe that the child is going to have contact, except for the smallest of kids. So we don't have, I'm not going to do it in this class, but there is a model that I've developed with a lot of folks around the country that takes you through these 4 major areas. We're going to talk about them, but it's actually a decision-making process that first looks at the child's developmental age, so you get guidelines like you did here, how much contact, what type of things should happen based on their developmental age, who are they attached to, and what are normal good parenting skills. And I tell you, there is no checklist. I have looked. There is no checklist I can find that says this is what good parenting is. Oh, there's all sorts of lists, folks, but they're way above child welfare minimum sufficient level of care standards. All right? We only are allowed legally to intervene in that precious parent-child relationship on the areas that the judge has ruled that is maltreatment. So here's the thing we try to do. You know what? I would not only like you to not hit your kids anymore, but I'd like you to have a better house. I'd like you to have a job. I'd like you to prove that you'll never drug again in your life. We actually can't require that. We do it all the time, but legally that is not a requirement. And these are also getting us in trouble with some of our appellate court rulings when it gets up to that level. It's like, what, you had the right to say, you deny them going home because they did all these things, but now you decided to do what we call scope creep. Come up to here, the parents got up there, our guts as social workers, attorneys, therapists, judges goes like this. We can't really name it, but so then we say, but then we want you to go to the next step. And the next court hearing, they've made some progress, and then we want you to go to the next step. And the next thing we know, we don't usually start out that way. We have a court order, requirements, case plans that are way out of any norm that, quite frankly, a lot of them I would have failed as a parent. All right, so we want to have that clear about what is normal parenting, but I don't have a good list for you. What is the type of parenting skills they have to work on and demonstrate based on the maltreatment? We're going to spend some time on this, the time and care and how that changes visit plans. And yes, there are visits post-permanency, post-reunification, post-adoption, post-guardianship. And if that wasn't enough, then we have to also think about visits through other lenses. Every family has a culture. What are we doing to encourage the child to remain connected with their culture? Whether that's culture with race, or culture with ethnicity, or culture with religion, or the community they live in. What if the parents are addicted, domestic violence, incarcerated? So basically it takes you through a lot of data points. It's hard to do good visit planning without knowing a whole lot about child welfare. It's not just this little thing over here, a scheduling issue. So just a moment on bonding attachment. Every visit should have at least one bonding attachment cycle. It looks like this. 6-month-old baby comes in care. Somewhere during the visit they get hungry. That means their body's in discomfort. How does a 6-month-old tell us they're hungry? They usually cry or fuss in some way. All right, so they communicated to it. What does a parent, could be older sibling, foster parent, relative, does not have to be a bio parent. What does the parent figure then do who's doing their job right? They feed them. Then not only does the child feel comfort, but the parent who provided that feels success. So the child becomes bonded and attached to you, and the adult becomes bonded and attached to the child. That's really important because we have some of our parents, either that was going to be a problem anyway, but particularly if we take away children at a very young age, they literally are not bonded and attached to their child. It's like this abstract thing. This doesn't just happen because you're a mommy and you gave birth to this child. It is also why foster parents and kids, if you want to say fall in love, bond and attach very quickly. And here's one of the things I had learned to say to your birth parents. You know what? You did something right that your child can love the foster parent. Versus, oh, foster parents, we used to say this, I was when I was a new social worker, I was told this in the 70s. When we recruit foster parents, we used to say the following things. Do not love, bond, or attach to that child. And if you do, we will remove them from your care and place them with another foster home. Because we believed at that time, at least some people believed, and there was lots of stuff, I mean, this is not just general. My BSW program talked about children are born tabula rasa. It was until the 50s and 60s the American psychological profession believed that bonding attachment was necessary for human development. So, not that far after all that. Now, with permanency planning, concurrent planning, what we're saying is, the more people I love as a child, the more lovable I will be, and the more resilient I will be to the trauma I experience in my life. So besides reading the child brain trauma research, like Linda mentioned, if you haven't done that, there's some great places, that book. Also, if you just put child trauma into search engines, you'll find like Dr. Bruce Perry's site, a couple other ones for free online training. You need to constantly think about it as like I think like a telephone cable. Little fiber optics, like the size of your hair. The more fiber optics that are working, the more they have and the more that are working, the healthier the child will be. This is normal development and to overcome trauma. Here's the good news about resiliency. The amount of trauma you have as a childhood, in your childhood, does not predict how much well-being problems you'll have it. Well, I was like, it doesn't predict how screwed up you'll be. You don't mind the expression. That's the good news for us. So you can get a child who's been highly traumatized, and yet they can overcome it. Their resiliency will overcome it. And if one or two of those key cables called mom and dad are either out of their life forever, no, they're never really out, but they're not functioning right now, the analogy I want you to have is this child has so many healthy connections that when they're traumatized or when they need help or they need other things, they can, as quick as the phone company does it, instantaneously use another cable to get their needs met. So our job is not just to get the kids safe today by putting them in a nice foster home. Our job is to be able to look at this kid at 25, 30 years old and see a young person with lots and lots of healthy cables. So that when they become a parent, hopefully we'll never see them in the system. And I do want to give you that good news if you don't know it. Most children who are in our system will not be back as parents. The other is not true. Most parents in our system, most young homeless people on the street, even some research says most people in our prisons were part of the child welfare system as a child. So we do have problems with that regard. But luckily, kids are resilient. They can overcome this, and the more they do this, the better. So on a visit, having the foster parent bring the child in, just fed, just got up, and the visit's so short the child has no needs, then they might have had a nice time together, but it's like, you know, Aunt Rose visiting with some of my nieces and nephews. They like me when I'm there, they don't think about me when I'm gone. And if they get hurt on that time I'm with them, they don't turn to me, they turn to mom and dad or grandparents who they're bonded and connected to, right? You should see in your written plans all the following items. They make sense, but again, most FACWA systems, court orders, just have the scheduling issues and not some of these other things. So I want to talk about what some of those are. So what are progressive visits? First visits are usually what? What's the first visit look like time-wise in yours? Just yesterday, placed the kid in foster care. You're doing a great job. You're having your first visit within 24 hours. How long is that visit going to be? A couple hours? Okay, great. Is it going to be supervised? Absolutely should be. Absolutely. By a trained social worker or somebody else. We don't have foster parents, other people supervising first visits, all right? Where's it often going to happen? In your agency office? Out in the community somewhere? Okay, great. So a lot of people move out in the community. So wherever you start, and you make sure people get through their discomfort and get that first kind of trauma, anxiety out about being in foster care and being away from each other and all of that, then slowly, carefully one little baby step at a time. You keep changing things whenever visits are good. So let's say you're having 3 visits a week. It could be even every week you would slowly ramp up progressively the visits. So it's not going to fit neatly into court orders, twice a week, 4 hour in this location, this level of supervision. That's often we see in court orders. But we need to change what we recommend in our court orders to say, over the next 3 months, we're going to start with twice a week for 2 hours in this community location with full supervision. But upon seeing the parents make progress, usually most places make it the state social worker. The state social worker is allowed and encouraged to take these progressive steps so that maybe in 3 months we've got it up to, 4 times a week, up to an hour, maybe more types of community locations, and starting to decrease the level of supervision slowly and safely. And only when it goes outside of that range do we need to come back into court. So we don't want this going into front of the judge every time you change one little piece of the visit plan. I'm going to stop right there. This is really important. So the idea is to go back to these elements. Here's another part of it. You can only change one element at a time. So what tends to happen when we do court-ordered visits right now is that every 3 to 6 months when you see the case and you get a report to the judges that the parent's doing well, we increase time, frequency, decrease location, the safety of the locations, and decrease supervision all at once. High-risk behavior. High-risk behavior for something going wrong. So in progressive visits, you have this continuum going. And of course, if you have problems, you are allowed and supposed to, as the social worker, take a step back. But you don't go back, let's say you started, let's just physically think about it. If this is the first visits, twice a week for 2 hours, highly supervised in a secure type of, well thought out community location, and you've made a lot of steps over the last 2 months, and then you have a problem, you don't go back there. You want to get those requests? Go back to start and go again. You step back to the last plan that was working. So you need to track what change was made, not the judge, but the social worker said, I decided to go from 1 hour to 90 minutes. Everything doesn't have to be on the hour, all right? And we started seeing these problems on the visit, so I'm going to go back to 1 hour. Then I might try, not go always up to time, but maybe they're doing good at 1 hour instead of 2 times a week, I'll go 3 times a week. Is it making sense? So sometimes you see this little dance going on, back and forth. And so the ones of you who are parents, attorneys, and stuff, need to know and work with your families that there'll be this little dance going on. Because as soon as there's a problem, and the kid looks like they're being traumatized or re-abused in the visit, we want to go back to the last safe visits. No visits just keep going because the judge ordered it if the kid is traumatized by the visit. And you do see that happening in some of our communities. So I'm going to stop right now for a few minutes. It's that time of day everybody wants to go to sleep. We're rapidly running out of time, but I just want to have questions now. We have other things we can talk about, but questions now about some of the concepts to do with parenting time and visits. Yes, ma'am.
How do you, okay, so I'm thinking of a situation in particular, one of my cases. You place with a family foster provider. How do you teach them to monitor phone calls, monitor things like that without, because, I mean, in order to increase that contact and maintain the bond, how do you?
Right, she's asking if they're placed with a foster parent and they're being allowed to have phone calls, or they're sneaking them, it's harder to do. But we might be encouraging them. For example, a real common thing that we're encouraging right now is for younger kids is that every night before bedtime that there's a phone call, and the parent says it just might be as simple as saying good night. It could be that they're reading a book to the child, or a little story, or singing a song, whatever, a little bedtime routine. Most of your parents, this is not going to be a problem that needs to be monitored. What is the most common allegation for kids going into foster care in your courts? What? Right, is neglect. So these parents are not, they're going to really get out of control. And even like I said, when I do that example, like going to church together, most of these parents have never even deliberately hit or harmed their child, even when they were intoxicated and all alone with the child. So our fear that they're going to do something wrong on a visit or a phone call is, now, we're going to get to a little slide a little bit later. Do you need to work with them around the boundaries and the rules? Absolutely. And you test that out on face-to-face visits to see if they can do that well. And say, yeah, if you're doing that well, that's part of the progressive visits. Now that we can see that you're doing these things well, you're not, bad-mouthing the foster parent, making secret plans where we're going to meet and run away together, whatever your fears are about that, or trying to get the kid to recant. Right? Most of our kids haven't, again, most of our children, again, aren't the ones who report to us. So the fear of recanting issues is not the biggest issue to deny a lot of contact. But they might get them to recant. Well, in a few cases that's important, then work on that. But don't deny the other 90% of your kids' contacts because it's applicable in a couple of cases in your court, right? So yes, you have to work with everyone, and I'll get to in a minute, but I want to show you a visual that I think will help you think through it. You really got to partner with the foster parent and the birth parent together and really help them understand that they are co-parenting or shared parenting and what's the impact on the child if we do things inappropriately on anybody's side. It isn't, and you could also say that if it's important enough that there will be a third party, whoever that might be, who's going to be listening in on the calls, if that's important to do, to first test out. In essence, you're supervising the calls just like you might originally supervise a face-to-face contact, and then as a parent shows they're appropriate and the kid's handling it well, then you can let them on. Other questions about anything so far? Yes?
I guess could you speak to when you were talking about the minimum best practices, one of the goals was to create consistency in daytime and patient activity.
Right.
And how do you do that with the element changing?
Okay, you're right, and that does kind of sound contradictory. That is what there is quite a bit of research on this, and so I encourage you to look at it. I have my interpretations of it. It's not definitive in the whole packet of those pieces. Kids and parents are more likely to show up if you have a consistent time, place, and location. If you're having trouble getting parents showing up, parents are more likely to show up for visits when it's not in our offices or an institutional setting. So if you're having trouble with some of your parents showing up, these are some things that will help change that. So yeah, you start with consistency and then you slowly add it. What we're trying to avoid is this week it's on Tuesday, next week it's on Wednesday, and the child, particularly the younger the child is, the less likely they are to be able to track that pattern, and so that will really be hard for them. So we're trying to avoid, and we're definitely trying to avoid the big event visits. It's Christmas, it's Thanksgiving, right? And the family wants to have this big event. Any of you looking forward to having Thanksgiving with your relatives, and some of you got a little nut going because it doesn't always turn out to be a happy event? So the big event thing is also something we're trying to avoid. More consistency, regularity. This works in divorce cases. What we see is tremendous stuff. The kids, if you took them to a psychiatrist early on in divorces, they would come up with all sorts of mental health diagnoses. And I'm like Linda, we shouldn't be saying, the one that she was talking about for the little kids,
Opposition.
Yes. Here's another one that I would like to see us get rid of. It mostly doesn't apply. It was never intended by DSM-4, whatever we're up to, is reactive attachment disorder. What we have, particularly for our kids who've been in the system a long time, and many placements and many adults have failed them, we have a normal, healthy, a traumatized child, but a normal, healthy reaction by a traumatized child to the reality of their life. Why should I bond and attach to the next person when the last 10 adults in my life who told me they would be there for me, not just their parents, but relatives, foster parents, caseworkers, judges, CASAs, and we weren't. We got a new job, right? And we didn't even say goodbye to that child, right? So we get these diagnoses. The kids respond, everybody, even the parents do. Particularly when you talk about some of your parents with drug-impacted brain. Consistency, being able to measure. It's another reason we want visits much quicker together for younger kids, because I can't understand the concept of next week when I'm a newborn. I can't understand that concept. Now, as a teenager, I can. In fact, I think about that son who was born premature. At 16 years old, if you'd put me in a locked room together, and said we had to spend a whole hour together, we would have looked dysfunctional to you. If that's the lens you want to look at it. Because him and I were not getting along for about a year of our life. Now, I can't hardly get the boy off the phone when he calls me now. He was in, I live in DC now, and he was in Seattle. But for that, you know, 1 year of his life. Okay, a couple of things I do want to get to as our times. I'm going to 2 o'clock, is that correct? Okay. There's more information in your slides and also this orange checklist about things that you should be thinking about in the way of what should happen. In a nutshell, what we're talking about here is once we get to the teaching visits, all visits have bonding attachment, but visits specific to teaching. For example, if we said, not just the parents shouldn't hit their kids in the name of discipline, right? Bruise and batter their kids in the name of discipline. We have told them and taught them and sent them to classes they need to use alternative disciplines like timeout, removal of privileges, predicting when your child's going to get in trouble and changing the environment. Those are things we're going to practice and work on in the visit. So not random parenting skills. And here I'll go back for a minute to the food one. The fact that they didn't bring in what you thought was an unhealthy snack, the fact that the parent brought in an unhealthy snack, get over it. If I don't get your time, get over it. Unless the judge, now look at that, I don't know who all the judges are in the room, unless the judge says food was part of the maltreatment, or you have a doctor's order that says this child will become ill today, not when they're 45 years old because they had too much sugar and fat, but ill today, then food is not the issue. But you get to say whether they're a good parent or not. Now, do I want to talk about the co-parenting stuff? It is an issue if the kid goes home and is now throwing up, right? But if they go home and they miss a meal, I don't know about you guys, but again, after 28 years of parenting, I can be pretty honest. I didn't feed my kids a healthy snack every day after school. They did have 3 square meals that meet the federal FDA requirements. That wasn't what people measured me against. My kids eat more healthy than I do now. One's vegetarian, one's vegan. And by the way, if you have foster parents who are vegetarian and vegan, they don't get to set the standard of the child's meals. And you may not run into this, but I'm running into that when people talk to me. We have a foster parent who has a kid on a vegan diet. And the problem is, when they go on visits and eat meat, they will get an upset tummy. This is where we have the problem with the co-parenting issue. And I want to get to that slide before we run out of time. Let me run through that. So, protective capacity, there's some examples of things in there, but I just don't have time. There's some discussion to really give you a challenge, some of the things you might want to talk this afternoon about. Do you have an agreed upon definitions for the different levels of supervision? So like a trained person in sight and sound with a distance of the child. Is that what you mean by supervised visits? Or somebody's looking in the window who's called a security guard. Is that a supervised visit? It should be, and you can define it in every case. It would be easier if your whole community decided what the definitions would be. I gave you some examples in that. And who's capable of doing different types of supervised visits. Sometimes it's all the way up to therapeutic people only in some of our most traumatized kids. Let's say a sex abuse case or a parent who deliberately sadistically abuses their kid, right? If they do get to face it, it's probably going to be in a therapeutic environment. But we get all the way down to safety supervision where it could be the church member. It could be that they're watching their kid's baseball game and there's enough other adults, they're in the stands watching the game, and there's enough other adults who would intervene if the parent became inappropriate, even without being told ahead of time. So who does that level of supervision? And so I could go on in different slides to give you some definitions, but I really encourage you to come up with your own that work for your community in Nebraska, including therapeutic. Here's another misnomer we hear a lot, particularly I get this request about parents' attorneys saying, well, if my parent was allowed to go to church 1 hour a week without the social worker sitting right next to them, aren't they capable of having the kid home 24/7? But no, the two things. So on a visit plan, you might be having the teaching visits or the therapeutic visits once a week out of those 4 or 5 contacts a week. That's real specific to that. And then have other types of parenting responsibility contact going on. So when you saw earlier that there might be 5, 6 daily contacts between a parent and child, you start thinking this whole mix, then you can see it doesn't require that the state social worker be there supervising every one of those contacts. And again, we're talking about our typical drug addicted, but they're currently involved with us, parents who've done low-level neglect, you can move into some of this stuff pretty quickly. Not day one of visit, but you can move into it pretty quickly, and you would see a mix like that. So first visits are all about getting the child and parent adjusted to being in foster care. And if you don't know this yet, I gotta let you tell you what the kids tell us all the time. Going to foster care is not a good thing for the vast majority of our kids. They may later on come to say it's a good thing, but initially they feel like they're the ones who are being punished. Particularly when they're taken out in the middle of the night, cops are there, domestic violence going on, kids getting hurt, cops come in, remove the kids, social worker comes in, takes them off in the middle of the night in the dark. I know how dark it can be in Nebraska, not the big city, right? In the middle of the dark, they have no idea where they're going. You place them with a stranger called foster parents. And then you're tired, you need to get back to your family, and you say, bye-bye, have a good time. I know these foster parents, because they're wonderful people, will take care of you. I'm 3 years old. What am I thinking? What is a 3-year-old thinking at that moment that just happened to them? Every single bloody thing in my life just changed. I have no skills yet at 3 years old to know how to deal with this. And we forgot, in the trauma of it, we forgot my favorite blanket or my binky. We forgot to ask the parents, what food am I on? Or allergies, or my schools. I don't get to see my school friends the next day, the older kids. Foster parent gets them up and very dutifully takes them to a new school. And they very dutifully take them to a new doctor. And we're getting shots pumped into kids without even talking to the parents whether they want those shots pumped into them or not. Like a year ago when everybody's saying H1N1 shots. How many of you got an H1N1 shot? Some of us, okay? I actually was going to, but they weren't available. Was there some controversy about that? Do we have the right in child welfare to tell the foster parents just take them off and get the shot done? Not without talking to the birth parent, right? This is always this. Who has the right to decide what haircut the kids get when they're in foster care? Birth parents, right? We all get that one. Hair will grow out again. It may be culturally inappropriate to cut some people's hair, but in some tribal cultures and stuff, this is a huge thing to do. So it's not just growing back out. We do things all the time to our kids without ever asking the birth parent. We get them shots. You can't take a shot back, right? We take them to religious organizations, not intending to indoctrinate them, but that's what happens. That's how I got my kids. I thought I got my kids to be Catholic. Currently, they're not practicing. I took them every Sunday, and I sent them to Sunday school, right? So see the big picture. If you take a child out of everything they know, in order to gain safety and well-being, you took away every healthy connection I had in life, every reality I had in life. Why should I want to be in foster care? Maybe eventually I'll fall in love with that foster home, and maybe eventually I'll come and say thank you to you as a professional for saving me from whatever, but that's not how the 3-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 10-year-old, the teenager looks at us when we do that to them. So you gotta think connections and not just, are they having a visit this week with their parents? Do I get to stay in my same school? The new 2008 Act says we were supposed to make every effort for school continuity. There's research that says children lose, on average, all kids, not specific to foster care, they lose 3 to 6 months of educational progress every time they change a new school. Think about how many schools some of your kids have been in. No wonder they're having trouble at school. Then they lose their school friends. They're involved in sports. They often lose their sports. These are some of the things that kept our kids going despite their inadequate parents, right? That special teacher at school. That neighbor next door who took care of me when my mom was high. Right? So those first visits are all about some of those things happening, and it may not just be about parents. It may be, maybe the most important person for me to see is my sibling. I'm a 5-year-old, I'm a parentified child, I've been taking care of my little sister. You just put me in a stranger foster home, you put her in another home. You might even have done it deliberately because you said, you know what, we just want that Rose at 5 not to be a parentified parent. So we're going to take her away from her siblings so she learns just to be a little 5-year-old girl. That was my lifeline. And what resiliency, bonding, attachment research says, this is the good thing about being good. I need as little, most of us need more, I need as little as one healthy, committed, bonded attachment relationship in my life to become a successful adult. And doesn't even have to be for the whole 18 years I'm a child. That is good news. Because you think about some of our kids, right? And that person could be my biological parent. It could be another type of parent figure. It could be my sibling, either because I was a parentified child or I was that 2-year-old that the 5-year-old took care of. I got unconditional committed love. And there's one other way that kids get unconditional committed love. What is that besides people? Pets. Pets. And for all of you who are real pet lovers, yes. Kids taking care of pets and pets getting unconditional love teaches them that bond that you can get your needs met. That you don't, there isn't conditions on you having your needs met. Conditions like my mom's not high today. You know, conditions like the social service system isn't so overwhelmed, I don't get to see my sibling, I don't get to be placed with them, right? We often put a lot of conditions even on our kids. So first visits, all about that, and completing the assessment, because we usually don't know at emergency removal all the stuff we need to know about the family, right? Questions about first visits, first month or so visits? Okay. Here's the picture I want you to go away with as we kind of wrapping up our day, or at least this part of the day. There are 3 roles of parenting. This was developed by Vera Fahlberg, who wrote one of her very first books called The Journey to Permanency. A lot of us still use that analogy, that the journey, our lives are, these kids' lives is a journey to permanency. There are your biological parents, and today that's even more difficult to explain to some kids because, you know, test tube babies and all sorts of ways that children are conceived. But it still takes a sperm and an egg to create a child in America, in the world, right? What do you get from your biological parents, even if you were never in utero with your mom? You had a surrogate mom. You never ever had anything except that sperm and an egg come together. What do you believe or know by research you actually get from that besides your physical looks? So besides from genetics, what are you going to get in your life besides that I'm 5'2" and I have green eyes and dark hair? I got that from my parents. What else might I have gotten from my parents? Well, there seems to be, that's the bottom line, a desire to know who your biological family is. Mom, dad, siblings. Health issues, absolutely. You know much more now about all sorts of, like, I have trouble with high cholesterol now. Found out that it runs in my family, so I should have been warned about that, but I didn't get warned until I started getting bad readings from the blood test, right? Temperaments, artistic abilities. There's a lot of different research going out. A lot of research has been done on identical twins who weren't raised together, how much they have in common. All right? So you get stuff from your parents even if you never lived a day in your life with them. As a child, then you get stuff from the people who give you care, which may be older siblings, your bio parents, foster parents. Every child in America, except some really strange situations, has multiple caregiving parents. Not just kids in child welfare who have foster parents. Who are other people who parent children? Grandparents, daycare, religious folks, coaches, right? 4-H people, right? Who are teachers of all different types. So we know it is possible. When you get in the courtroom, Your Honors, and then people are saying it's not possible. The only way that child can have a healthy life is if they are in my house following my rules and never the twain shall meet with these other people. The child will just be too confused if they have 2 sets of rules. You ever heard that argument? Have 2 different diets, 2 different ways they get disciplined. We all have to have 100% agreement or the child will be really confused. No! The people confused are the adults. Here's one way I know it for not only research is my best friend's a kindergarten teacher. Just beginning of school the last couple of weeks, right? She says, after 30-some years of teaching kindergarten, and almost all of her kids have come from the preschool as part of the Catholic school she teaches in. Right? So they've been in full-time preschool already. There is something about kindergartens, and especially mothers. It is a big rite of passage for mothers to have their son or daughter go to kindergarten. They are emotionally upset the first day of kindergarten, even though that child's been a whole year on that same school grounds in preschool. Something about kindergarten. So she has this whole thing, and they've all got to visit ahead of time. You know, visit the classroom, all this stuff. They have, you know, in the spring they have these visit days. You're going to go to kindergarten next year. So she does this. She literally stands like this at the doorway. Say goodbye, Mom. No, you can't come in the classroom. No, I know you want to help, can't even hang up the coat. Say goodbye. And then they get in the classroom, and then this year she's got an exceptionally good group of kids. Within 2 weeks, she had them down to all the routines. Like they'll line up, they'll put on their shoes, they'll tie them themselves, they'll put on their jackets, they'll blow their nose themselves, they can go to the bathroom by themselves. The parents will all come into her before kindergarten starts and says, "Oh, Mrs. Cornwell, you just have to understand, my child's really special, so you can have to tie his shoes." She goes, "No, I don't do that. I had 25 kids in my classroom. Do you want me to be teaching, or you want me to be tying 25 sets of shoes?" "Oh, my child's really special. They got a sniffle today, so they can't go to the outside recess." They either stay home, or they go to outside recess, get them the right clothes. The point I make, then about a month into school, she starts having the parents start having to do days in the classroom to watch the kids and help out in the classroom. These parents are absolutely amazed, because when the kids go home, do they tie their shoes? That same kid tie their shoe at home? No, they know Mrs. Cornwell knows that they can do that, and she won't do it for them, or they can't go out to recess unless they have their jacket on. But when they get home, they revert back to all these other behaviors. That is normal childhood behavior. This is not a psychologically dysfunction, confused kid. They're smart enough to figure out different people have different rules. My son's figured out my husband's an easier tap on money than me. They go to him whenever they want to have money. They don't go to mom unless they're really desperate and they have to have a good reason, right? They get it from me sometimes, but it's easier to tap into dad, right? So when the parents then come in front of you as social workers and judges, they'll start saying, "See, the kid's all messed up. We're going to develop this kid who's schizophrenic and who doesn't know rules and boundaries." We're like, no. I mean, again, in the extreme case, you might be right, but most of them, no, they're not confused. The parents are all confused, right? And or they're all upset about their way is the right way and no other way is the right way to parent. All right, here's the third type of parenting we seldom talk about. People are legal parents. They have legal responsibilities and authority over their children in the United States. What legal decisions do parents get to make for their kids that other adults who are not, or just caregiving adults, don't get to make? We talk about haircuts and religion. What else? Education, private or public, homeschool, not, right? Medical, what type of medical care? Do I believe in holistic care? Do I believe in some type of tribal care? Do I believe in going to the Mayo Clinic? What type of medical care do I believe in? Do I believe kids should get immunization shots or not? Right? And we can go on, right? So, what the child welfare system, I think this picture tells us in a nutshell why long-term foster care doesn't work and where a lot of the fights get in front of the people like you. We act as if, first of all, we are the legal parents once they become not the only legal parents. So, in a child in foster care, instead of just having 2 people or maybe 3 or 4 with grandma and grandpa do all these roles, we now have 10 to 15 adults who now have a parenting responsibility. We have the birth parents, we have the foster parents, we have judges, attorneys. I love the list that we got earlier today. How many attorneys might be in the courtroom? CASAs. We have the agency staff, and we might even have some therapeutic staff or other folks who are doing different pieces of the thing called parenting. We have acted in child welfare as if you can divide these roles up and never the twain shall meet. Foster parents can't meet birth parents or else everything will go, who knows, they might come over and murder them in the middle of the night, right? Have to have absolute confidentiality about that foster parent. Again, I want to tell you, get over it. If your birth parents want to find your foster parents, 2 ways I know they can do it in your communities alone. The internet and stand outside Walmart for a while. Or whatever the big store in your community is. Sooner or later, that foster parent and your kid are going to walk in the door, and then you'll know. And they truly are dangerous parents, which we do have, and they might track them home, then just not telling them who they are is not going to protect them, because they can find them, especially in little rural communities. There's not many secrets, right, in little rural communities, but even in big cities like Seattle, they find them. This model doesn't work, because often the child is the only one seeing and talking to everybody. State agency workers don't talk to the parents' attorneys. If you get in a fight with the CASA or the guardian ad litem, don't talk to them, because we might lose our case in court. But in the meantime, see all the holes left for that kid that nobody's taking care of? Who's making sure their educational progress is? Who's working on their moral development? Who in your community talks to your teenagers about sex and decides what they should talk to about sex? You think they're not having it because I don't think about it because you guys aren't talking about it? I know it's not easy. When my kids out through that age, I even teach this stuff to social workers. Or at my church in pre-marriage classes, I teach sex. But I won't teach them, I didn't teach my own sons that. I turned to my husband one day and go like, you had to talk, didn't you? It's a hard thing to do. To get 15 people. My husband and I don't agree. Get 15 people together to agree on what should happen. So a visual I want you to have for what we really want our system to look like for the short time, because also this means why it's so complicated to do this. For the short time they're in care, we want our system to look like this. A lot easier to draw than it is to do. That is, we have divided areas that we are individually responsible for. We have areas of agreement that we agree this child needs to have consistency, and thereby we will all work together on that and not have separate rules and get the kid in a bind, right? But there are no gaps left for the kid. There's no barriers put up about we can't talk to each other under the name of confidentiality all the time. That we really work together. We are shared parents. And just as much as the birth parents, the foster parents, they may have more opportunity to see it, should be able to say when they're 18, when they're 22, when they're 25, when they're 30, which I wish I could tell some of my parents now who said, just wait till you have kids, because I hadn't had my first kid when I started this work. You'll find out you have to beat them too to get train your kids by beating them. Like I didn't, and I can look, and at least to my level of assessment, I got 2 healthy, functioning young men in my life now. That's what we want to be able to say in child welfare. Not that they're just safe today, but they are that. And so we will have post-visit plans once they go back to their parents for reunification cases. Who do they want to see? Who have they fallen in love with while they're in foster care? Foster family, new school friends, new teachers, maybe a new religion, new sports, right? If they go and they are adopted by our families, who do they want to see? They want to see their birth family. Absolutely. They want to see their siblings. They may choose to not see a particular parent, and that may be a very healthy thing to do. They may choose that at 10 and change their mind at 15. Very classic in teenage years that they'll change their mind and want to see them then. So we need to have adoptive guardianship parents who will allow them and support them and keep them safe, because some of these parents aren't better 10 years later. A lot of them are. All right, a few more minutes. Other questions about visits? Again, there's a lot more examples and things in this, and also this checklist we got for you. Quick minute, we have a minute, a couple minutes here on addiction. It's right here. When you have an addicted parent, which as we heard from Linda, could be a large percentage of your caseload, they are allowed to have visits based on whether they are capable today. Not necessarily, it's based on clean and sober today. Taking a P test 2 minutes before the visit and assuming that equals the parent's ability to have the visit does not work. One, you can fake P test, and I know I would have if somebody made that my requirement to see my kid and I know I just took drugs today. 2, even if the test is absolutely accurate and read accurately, which the research says we don't do well on, it doesn't tell you the level of sobriety, the level of incapacitation. And 3, they might have been 100% clean and sober when they took that test, but they know visits are one of the most stressful things we ask our parents to do, especially early on. And what does a stressed out addict do? Go use. So they went to the bathroom between when you took the P test and partway through the visit. And they took their drug of choice. So I have nothing against and absolutely for that no matter what, when the parent, whether it's you notice it before a visit, you have them come in, you're talking to them, deliberately have them come early, talk to them as the worker or the supervisor of the visit, see how, if they're in their cognitive brain or making sense. Talk about what's going to happen on the visit, but what you know you're doing is in essence you're doing the drug test. And that a trained person then is in the visit with them, and as soon as they see inappropriate behavior, they try to intervene. Now this takes training, I don't know how to do it, but as soon as you see inappropriate behavior, you intervene. And if it doesn't work, In my basic one, it's 2 times you're out. I'll come over to you once, remind you what you're doing, mom or dad, and then if you still can't, then get yourself back into it. Then it goes like, the conversation goes like this. Usually try to do it away from the kid. I'm really sorry, Mom. I know you're trying really hard today, but remember we talked about X, and I gave you some suggestions and you aren't able to follow through with it? I cannot allow you to have a bad bonding experience with your child, because every time you do that experience wrong once, you're going to have to do it right 2 or 3 times. And even if you think I am your worst case nightmare of a social worker, you don't want to give me the evidence that you're not doing well on visits. First of all, it's about your kid, right? And so I'd rather you have a 30-minute successful visit and we called it early than an hour visit that we got proof that it was wrong and the kid got re-abused or traumatized during the visit. That doesn't mean tomorrow's visit won't happen, because then we're going to do it again. And then eventually if it becomes a problem, then we'll go back into court and talk about what should happen. So it's not no visits ever again, but we'll call the visits early. So in your relapse, your drug-addicted parents, you really want to have, like any of them, but have really clear boundaries and not just say, are you high today or not is the only boundary. What are the bad behaviors? And as soon as we see them, we're going to intervene. And if the intervention doesn't work, we're going to call today's visit early. And it's an easy way to talk to kids too. You go, especially younger kids, you say something like, you know, Johnny, how sometimes you have a bad day and the foster parent or your birth parent says kind of like time out, go to your room for a while, or take a, go to the corner, or whatever way they help you learn to calm down. So that's what's happened today. We're here, that everybody needs a time out. Because sometimes it's a kid who's out of control and the parent doesn't know how to control them too. So then we just stop the visit, we say goodbye. And it takes training on how to do that. So we're looking for not just completion of treatment, but as I said at the beginning of the session, we are looking in a series of progressive visits that for the reunified parent, when we get all the way out here from where we started there 12 months ago, we're doing multiple overnight visits in the parent's home, unsupervised, and during triggers like it's Friday night, or I just got paid, or my boyfriend came over with some drugs, and not that I never relapse, but that my first instinct now is I got to get my kids safe. Whether it's calling up the former foster parent, calling up the social worker, calling up their whoever is going to keep the kids safe, and then I call up my drug person, like my AA person. That's what we're looking for, the changed behavior. Not that they'll never relapse, but will their relapse plan actually work? There's a minute or so left. Other questions? Yes?
Regarding this addiction topic,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a guardian ad litem, and a lot of the cases I work on, the parents have substance abuse problems. And I understand you want parents to have visits, and unless there's a safety threat and they test positive, you don't want to cancel the visit. But if we're allowing parents to have visits after they've tested positive, how likely are those parents to recover from their substance abuse problem or go to treatment? And if they do that during the current case, and then they get reunified and it closes, are they likely to be back in the system
Okay.
for a drug?
I don't know if you can hear all of her questions. So basically, she's asking about, is it really a good idea? Are we, in essence, the way Dr. asked me the question, are we becoming codependent with the parent by not confronting them that today? Here's a couple things to clarify. I have nothing against drug treatment and drug testing. If that's what the therapist and the court are using very appropriately around, are you making progress in your recovery? Absolutely keep it in place. I'm not saying don't cancel it for those purposes. What I'm saying is, when a parent comes in for today's visit, and I'll change the opening sentence or one of the opening sentence you gave, and the visit is about meeting the child's needs, not whether the parent deserves the visit or not. If the parent is capable to, right at this moment, to have the visit, so I'm not talking about you fall down drunk. Of course you're not going to have a visit then. Or so high that they can't have a conversation with you, you're not even going to let them in the room with the kid. See, that's But if you just say every time they test a little bit, because you, for example, you could be on marijuana and you can test positive weeks later. Are you high today? Are you incapable today of having? Some people might say I'm a drug addict because I drink regularly. I have to drink alcohol. I don't believe I've ever maltreated my kids because of it. So we have to be much more clear. When, with our drug addicted parents, when you were high, you didn't supervise your kids so they got hurt. When you were drugging regularly, you drank up all the food money in the house so your kid didn't get food. When you were intoxicated, you brought inappropriate people in the house and they harmed the kid, right? So that we really link the addiction to the maltreatment. We set that standard about what we're doing. The kids know their parents have drug problems. So what you're trying to do is say, oh, they're just never going to know. We're going to protect the kids for not knowing their parents have. The kids are actually, one of the things we're going to want to know in a relapse plan, we want to know what's their triggers, time, place, location, activities, and what's their red flags. What do they start looking like, acting like when their drug-addicted brain is taking over? So please go online to what Linda had if you don't know what this is about how drugs impact the decision parts of your brain. Then, as an older child, a social worker, anyone else who's helping with visits, we can intervene to get the kids safe way before we see the parent become so out of control in a visit, whether it's getting. So we're practicing not just they were clean and sober on the visits. Sooner or later, here's my theory, I'm going to give you a leave it, 2 deaths that took off. Sooner or later, I am telling you, you must test out whether the relapse plan is working. So if you make visits so safe, so restrictive, that we never see them at home, that we never let them anywhere close to the kid if they had any type of bad UA, 1, we're punishing the kid, and 2, you don't really know whether they, when they go home, whether they're really going to continue to be able to stay with their relapse plan. Not that they'll never relapse, but the relapse plan is strong enough. Is that making sense? So it's not saying I never ever want anyone to walk away from my class and I said it was okay to be high on a visit. High is different than not passing a drug test. Am I clear enough about that? Being high and not able to do parenting is different than what the drug, because drug tests aren't that sophisticated. Right, so, and if they come in and they're acting high and they pass their drug test for whatever reason, they're still not going to get a visit. If you're not appropriate on the visit, you're not appropriate on the visit. We never want that bonding cycle to be repeated in a bad way again. If we can control it, we always want that bonding cycle to have been a successful one, rather than a bad one on visits. A couple resources for you. This one's in your handouts. This is just some general ones. The Resource Center I work for, Information Gateway. There, if you go to the California Clearinghouse on Evidence-Based Practice, you will find information about what are some evidence-based practices about teaching parenting skills. So if you don't know what some of those are, like Triple P programs, parent-child interaction therapies. Here are some free trainings for you. First one, actually I'm involved in all 3 of these. Online at the Child Welfare Information Gateway, just came out this month, is a traditional kind of online class that gets into more case-specific examples than we did today. No CEUs with it right yet, but they are free. Through this project, through the Eyes of the Child, I was here earlier this year. They did excellent sessions where they brought in youths and we all talked about sibling visits, placement, contacts issues. So if you want to get some great information about what we do when siblings aren't together to maintain those relationships. Some wonderful youth came in and presented for us. So that's available through the Eyes of the Child. And I did a similar session to this, but a little bit more in depth. Had a long time for University of Washington's Legal Academy, and they have it there. Anyone, also other folks who are interested, they had some great legal folks like Judge Edwards, who's famous for a lot of work he's done in child welfare. So they've done similar things that this project does. They often videotape their presentations and they get it online for free. So thank you very much. It's been great to work with you today, and good luck with your work.